Topping the headlines on the Daily Report this Wednesday. The International Monetary Fund has cut its global economic growth forecast for this year to 3.2% amid the rampant repercussions of Russia's war in Ukraine. And leaders in the West have pledged more military support to Ukraine as forces there seek to bolster their defense against a fresh Russian offensive in the eastern Donbas region. Also, escalating energy costs are in turn pushing the price of airline tickets for those seeking to fly beyond borders amid the rollback of stringent COVID-19 travel protocols. Welcome to yet another edition of the Daily Report. It's Wednesday, April 20th here in Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee. Following the World Bank's recent lowering of its global economic growth outlook to the 3% range for this year, the International Monetary Fund has done the same, also citing the crisis in Ukraine as reason for the revision. Our Kim Yeon-sung explains.
Prices will rise while the economy is expected to shrink. The International Monetary Fund on Tuesday announced its 2022 World Economic Outlook, and the growth forecast looks dim. The IMF estimated the global economy will grow 3.6% in 2022. That's 0.8% lower than the IMF's previous estimate announced back in January. It's also significantly lower than the global output in 2021, which was more than 6%. The global economy is weighed down by the pandemic, but perhaps even more heavily by Russia's war on Ukraine.
Global economic prospects have been severely set back, largely because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This crisis unfolds as the global economy has not yet fully recovered from the pandemic.
The war has also sharply pushed up prices. European consumer prices are expected to rise a whopping 12.6% this year. The region's GDP projections for 2022 has also been reduced to a mere 1.1%. South Korea also saw its potential growth cut. The country's 2022 outlook was lowered by half a percentage point to a new estimate of 2.5%. Consumer prices in South Korea are expected to rise 4%.
Experts forecast high inflation to continue for another year or two, but South Korea has preemptively raised interest rates. Because we raised the interest rate by 0.25 percentage points back in April, we have some wriggle room to deal with inflation.
This medium-term outlook bore bad news for all, except for the commodity traders who benefited from price hikes. Russia's invasion of Ukraine could leave long-lasting scars on the world's economy.
The war also increases the risk of a more permanent fragmentation of the world economy into geopolitical blocs with distinct technology standards, cross-border payment systems, and reserve currencies.
The most deeply scarred were the parties involved in the conflict. Russia's economy is expected to contract 8.5%. Ukraine is expected to shrink by 35%. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
And here on the domestic front, Lee Chang-yong will be heading the Bank of Korea come Thursday. In a confirmation hearing earlier on Tuesday, he placed priority on taming inflation. Our Ji-young has more on his remarks.
President Moon's nominee to lead the Bank of Korea, Lee Chang-yong, will take office on Thursday, now that Parliament has given its approval for his appointment. In his confirmation hearing Tuesday, he suggested that if he's put in charge, the BOK will continue to raise interest rates to tame high inflation. Sharing his views on monetary policy, he said, high inflation will likely last for a while.
The high inflation is due to the rise in oil prices amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic. I believe that this inflationary pressure will continue for another 1 or 2 years.
He added that inflation could, in fact, rise further as demand recovers and people spend more due to greater government outlays and the end of social distancing.
The expected inflation rate is rising, so we will do our best to signal the curbing of inflation by raising rates, even if this is not what some people prefer.
But he added, if South Korea hikes its key interest rate quickly, as the U.S. appears to be doing, it could damage the country's economy. Instead, he said monetary policies will be implemented at an appropriate speed in a way that can tame inflation while not undercutting the momentum of economic growth or having a negative impact on vulnerable people. He noted that as South Korean society ages and the workforce shrinks, there's a need for long-term monetary policy aimed at preventing a decline in economic growth. Also, he said a pan-governmental task force should be formed to ensure a soft landing in terms of the country's rising household debt, something he said cannot be done by the central bank alone. 엄지영, Arirang News.
South Korean and U.S. trade officials are discussing key issues, including the launch of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, as well as steel tariffs. Now, Seoul's Trade Minister Yoon Suk-yeol has reportedly welcomed Washington's plan to set up a regional trade framework as the global market seeks to move beyond the pandemic. He also asked a senior U.S. embassy official about the possibility of a revision to Section 232 tariff rules, which had been imposed under the Trump administration. Under that deal, the U.S. waived a 25% tariff on South Korean steel imports in return for the U.S. buying a yearly quota of 2.63 million tons of Korean steel products. Officials from South Korea's steel industry are currently in the U.S. to discuss the matter at the industry level. Meanwhile, the price of imported wheat per tonne surpassed $400 in March for the first time since the 2008 global financial crisis. According to the Korea Customs Service, the price hit $402. Now, this is an 8.8% jump from the month prior and a 41.4% jump on year. Pundits believe Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as well as soaring shipping costs, are behind the surge. And on the international front, Western leaders have pledged greater military support for Ukraine as the country seeks to fend off a fresh Russian offensive in the eastern Donbas region. Our Kim Hyo-sun has the latest.
Major world leaders have vowed to send more artillery to Ukraine amid Russia's all-out offensive in the eastern part of the country. U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with his British and Canadian counterparts, as well as other allied leaders, in a video call on Tuesday aimed at addressing their continued support for Ukraine. The call was also attended by leaders of Germany, Italy, and Poland. Following the 90-minute call, White House Press Secretary Yoon Suk-yeol told reporters that their leaders reaffirmed their commitment to providing Ukraine with security, economic, and humanitarian assistance. She added that Washington will continue to supply ammunition and military aid to Ukraine. The news comes as the Pentagon confirmed that shipments of the latest round of U.S. military assistance to Ukraine, which includes heavier weapon systems, have started to arrive in the region. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz noted that the goal of dozens of nations is to make Ukraine's military capable of resisting Russian aggression.
We have asked the German arms industry to tell us what material it can supply in the near future. Ukraine has now made a selection from this list, and we're providing it with the money necessary for the purchase.
The UK is looking at ways to supply anti-ship missiles to Ukraine. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson added his country also has other options under consideration. Against its backdrop, Ukraine says Russia's full offensive against its eastern Donbas region has begun, with top officials describing it as the, quote, second phase of the war. The country's defense ministry explained that the aim of Moscow's new military offensive in the east is to take full control of the region and create an overground link between territories in the east and Crimea. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, U.S. top nuclear envoy Song Kim met with South Korea's Foreign Minister Nominee Park Jin here in Seoul earlier on this Wednesday. Now, on the list of topics for discussion were North Korea's recent acts of provocation, the incoming Yoon administration's North Korea policies, as well as early summit prospects between their leaders in May. Kim is also set to meet national security officials of the new administration, including the unification minister nominee, before his departure from Seoul on Friday. And earlier on Tuesday, that would be, the U.S. point man on North Korea affairs sat down with officials of the Moon administration, including the ministers of foreign affairs and unification, to reaffirm their country's commitment to collaboration with regard to security concerns on the Korean peninsula. Our Han Sung-woo reports.
The United States Special Representative for North Korea, Sung Kim, met Tuesday morning in Seoul with South Korea's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chung Eui-yong, and according to the ministry, they discussed ways to manage the tense situation on the Korean peninsula. Chung reportedly stressed the importance of a strong joint defense posture and mutual cooperation to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table. The U.S. envoy agreed and also emphasized that North Korea's provocations should be met with a strong response. He reaffirmed, though, that the U.S. is open to talks with the North without preconditions. In the afternoon, Kim met with Unification Minister Arirang. Minister Lee stressed the need for peace and stability in the region by continuously working together in the search for a diplomatic solution to North Korea's raising of tensions. Kim reportedly thanked Lee, who'll be leaving office soon, for his cooperation while in his post, and told him too that the U.S. is open to dialogue with the North. 한성우, Arirang News.
And the U.S. is accusing North Korea of relying on illicit activity, including cybercrime, to fund its development of weapons of mass destruction. According to White House Deputy National Security Advisor Ann Neuberger, Tuesday, North Korea was responsible for the recent theft of $620 million in cryptocurrency. Now, she claimed this reality is proof of North Korea's reliance on illicit crypto gains to advance its weapons programs. She also added the U.S. has published security guidance for the cryptocurrency community to better protect exchanges. President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden may meet online for the first time in early May if Mr. Yoon partakes in the virtual global COVID-19 summit scheduled for May 12th, 2 days after his inauguration here. Our Yoon Jung-min has more on these prospects.
There's the possibility that South Korean President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol and U.S. President Joe Biden could meet for the first time online next month. In a joint statement released on Monday with Belize, Germany, Indonesia, and Senegal, the White House said the U.S. will co-host the second global COVID-19 summit on May 12th. That's earlier than a possible Yoon-Biden summit speculated to take place face-to-face in Seoul later in May. The president-elect's team said whether to join the event will be decided and announced after Yoon is inaugurated as the president on May 10th.
The schedule for after the inauguration will be dealt with at the presidential office. There will be coordination beforehand, but there's nothing we can confirm at this moment.
The U.S. held the first global COVID-19 summit last September, and South Korean President Moon Jae-in took part in the meeting virtually. But since they will meet virtually, it remains to be seen whether Yoon and Biden will be able to say hello to each other and have some communication online, as world leaders usually send pre-recorded video messages. The White House says leaders will be discussing vaccinations and mitigating the impact of the pandemic. The agenda is expected to include getting more shots into arms, deploying tests and treatments, as well as expanding and protecting the health workforce. Amid rising geopolitical tensions with the U.S., it's unlikely that Russia and China will join the meeting. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Korea's COVID-19 tally on this Wednesday remains on the 100,000 level. Officials have recorded 111,319 new infections over the past 24 hours, a slight retreat from the day prior. Now, caseloads have been on a tangible decline in recent weeks. Also, come next Monday, eating popcorn and more at movie theaters and indoor stadiums will be permitted, as will the sampling of food and makeup at supermarkets and department stores. Within the academic arena, schools will fully reopen to all students starting May 1st. With officials pledging to only switch to online classes as a last resort. Meanwhile, the fate of mask requirements outdoors will be shared in early May. And in the absence of social distancing guidelines, health authorities are now urging for informed decisions by the public to ensure protection against the pandemic. The incoming Yoon administration, for its part, is seeking to secure more COVID-19 treatment pills in preparation for a possible resurgence later this year. Here's our Lee Kyung-eun.
With social distancing rules fully lifted in South Korea as of this week, health authorities are discussing revising virus prevention protocols at public facilities like cafes and restaurants for people to follow voluntarily. This includes frequent ventilation, keeping face masks on as much as possible, and requiring senior centers to allow only those who are fully vaccinated with a third shot to enter. This comes as the overall risk of COVID-19 in South Korea remains to be classified as high, the second highest level in the 5-tier evaluation scheme, due to fatalities still at alarming level, posting over 1,700 in total last week, and most importantly as the highly contagious Stealth Omicron now accounting for 91.5% of the cases sampled. With a resurgence highly possible as early as this fall or winter, the incoming Yoon administration is already devising post-Omicron responses focused on treatments. And Yoon's transition team has asked health authorities to expand the eligibility of the COVID-19 pills to those over 12 years old who are at high risk of developing severe symptoms.
The pills are currently administered to those over 60 or those in their 40s and 50s with weakened immune systems. The plan is to include those over 12 years old with underlying health conditions.
Shortly after the announcement, the KDC has said the measures will need to be thoroughly reviewed medically, although no major side effects from that age group have been reported in other countries. As for the supply, Yoon's transition team is in talks with the current government about the purchase of additional COVID-19 pills. It had previously negotiated with Pfizer and helped South Korea's contracted doses arrive earlier than planned. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the price of airline tickets appears to have taken its own flight high above in response to soaring fuel expenses amid the crisis in Ukraine. Our Yoon-jin reports.
If we look on a flight comparison website, flights to New York for next week cost 2,090,000 Korean won. That's roughly $1,700 US. This is a significant hike from the roughly $1,200 for the same route on March 11th, just before the lifting of the travel quarantine was announced. And before the COVID-19 pandemic, this same route was under $1,050. But with the latest rise in demand for overseas travel, such discounted prices are impossible to get. The outbreak of the war in Ukraine has caused the soar in international oil prices, which is reflected in airfare as well. For U.S. route flights for next month, Korean Air charges around $200 in fuel tax, and Asiana Airline charges $160, which is more than 3 times higher than it was in February 2021. Despite such rises, demand for travel is also on a sharp increase. Just a week before the quarantine exemption was announced, there were only some 675 sales of travel packages. But after the announcement, that number increased more than twofold in the space of a week and has increased roughly 20% every week since. In just 1 month, the number of travel package sales have increased 442%. Most of the demand is for flights to the U.S. or Europe, where much of the quarantine restrictions for arriving travelers have been lifted. Airlines have been working hard to increase the number of international flights in a rush to bring flights back to normal, but the number of flights are at a mere 12% compared to before the pandemic. Industry analysts expect this number to only rise to 50% by the end of the year, which means continued high demand for travel will keep discounted airfare scarce and prices will remain high for the time being. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
K-pop sensation BTS is back home following 4 sold-out concerts in Las Vegas. Now, with the exception of RM, the other 6 members arrived at Incheon International Airport Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after they left for the US. After a short break, BTS will prepare for the release of a new album on June 10th. The band's expected return will mark 11 months since the release of the hit single Butter last July. Also on the K-pop front, up-and-coming girl group aespa is set to take the U.S. music scene by storm. The band will perform at this year's Coachella, one of the country's biggest music festivals, just 2 years after its debut. Now, aespa will be the first K-pop band to perform on the Coachella main stage. No other Korean acts that have performed at the festival have played the main stage, including Blackpink. On Saturday, aespa will perform hit songs like Black Mamba, Next Level and Savage, as well as a special unreleased track. Starting this week, pandemic-related restrictions on gatherings and business hours have been rolled back. Now, the measure comes slightly more than 2 years since their implementation in early 2020. For more on Korea's path into a new normal, I have Professor Kim In-kyu from Yonsei University. Professor Kim, welcome back.
Great to be here again.
I also have Professor Yu Byung-wook from Sooncheng University. It's a pleasure to have you back, Professor Yu. Right, Professor Kim, before we delve into the actual lifting of social distancing measures here in the country, let's touch upon the latest COVID-19 situation here in the country as revealed by our tallies, and also the detection of the XE and XM variants here in the country recently.
Well, the peak daily tally was about 3 weeks ago, but actually 7-day average of the cases were already started to decline 4 weeks ago. So, and it's continuing to decline, so that's a good news. And interestingly, it's following just the same pattern as Denmark, almost the same number if we compare per population, about 8,000 per million was the peak. And one thing different is Denmark started 1 month earlier than Korea, and we're just following that pattern. So I just tried to figure out why is that so similar. We have some similarities if we compare Denmark and Korea. Denmark was relatively spared from previous outbreaks, and since the outbreak of Omicron, Denmark was one of the best countries to deal with COVID-19. They had a brief lockdown, but it was okay. But since the start of Omicron, it was just skyrocketed, and we show the same pattern. And I think geographically, Denmark is a peninsula, and they have relatively easy to block with other influx of confirmed cases. So I think we are overcoming the wave of Omicron right now. But every time we face a new variant, we cannot know 100% about what's going to happen for a while. So as you just mentioned, we have a new emergence of XL, XM, XE or something. But I think that will be similar to Omicron and not a big deal for us right now. But it's going to take about a few more weeks to see the pattern of spreading and the course of the disease and also the consequences. I think this is the time we have to plan for long COVID. We don't know much about it, and we should have the data of our own. So I wish that the authorities make a precise plan to monitor what's going to happen with these long COVID symptom patients.
Right, and speaking about authorities, Professor Yu, they claim that Korea's current COVID-19 situation is within medical capacity, hence their lifting of social distancing measures. Speaking within your capacity as a doctor, what can you tell us?
Well, since the beginning, health authority and the government say everything's under control and medical capacity can take care of serious cases, but reality is a little far from the mentioned. But anyway, now as doctor, you ask me, yes, we start to breathe. Start to breathe mean now serious cases patient is relieves, and the death case is also a little bit less than before. But my concern is that still we have around 700 to 800 who are staying in intensive care unit. They still need our hands. But fortunately, our dear watchings to our Arirang, you know what? ICU mean doctors and the nurses, medical professional, we can take care of that. More professional, focus one patient. But worse, So more patients, they watching the less medical professional. But now I can tell. So if we don't have any other variants, it's like Omicron and more, the stronger one, yes, we should be control of the lift of the social distance measure. But already we are relaxing now. People are already celebrating to free from any restriction. So very difficult to end the social control. But in medical part, if it's necessary, we will ready to accept it.
Right, and maybe to have some kind of control, Professor Kim. The mask mandate has been maintained for the time being, with authorities adding that the decision on outdoor requirements will be made in early May. I think we talked about this before as well. But Professor Kim, what are your thoughts on the lifting of face masks outdoors?
Outdoors, I think it's relatively safe right now. If somebody asked me that, is it sure, 100% sure that there's no possibility of transmission outdoors, it's hard to say. It is 0%, but I would say it's very low, about 19 times less than indoors. So you can expect that outdoors is relatively safe in the condition that we have a ventilation, air is moving around. I think in China they are dealing with Omicron in a very harsh way, lock down the whole city. But outdoors activity might be a little bit eased. I mean, it can be eased. I don't think that strong strategy might be necessary. So, except a place overcrowded, outdoors mask may not be necessary, and transmission might be very less. But now, almost all the Korean people are vaccinated. But still, there are some not vaccinated right now. So if you are not vaccinated, I think that person might need an outdoor mask still. And the high-risk group might have to go and get vaccinations if needed.
Right. And Professor Yu, what are your thoughts on the indoor requirement of face masks?
Well, some people criticize the idea about it, because when you use the cafe and you enjoy the dining in the restaurant, yes, you take a mask. Yes, we did it. But you know what? All the dining staffs and all workers in the cafe, there is a mask, wear a mask is mandatory. For me, I work in the hospital, in the medical facilities. Yes, I never thought of a take a mask, even indoor and outdoor neither. Why? I should be healthy, ready to take care of our patient in my responsible. So, outdoor, the wearing mask can be released because what the Professor Kim mentioned about less chance, but cloud is way better too. But it's not the mandatory kind of liberal recommendation. But indoor is different. So even we are take off the mask while we are having food and enjoy the cafe. But in case if you're in the class, in the conference, better to wear a mask because we didn't know who are catching the virus or can be transmitted, because even the Omicron the rate of the fatality is very less, but still 3-digit number of the deaths is coming now.
Right. We've also lost 166 lives on this Wednesday as well. Professor Kim, research shows that asymptomatic COVID-19 patients mount a strong immune response compared to their symptomatic counterparts. That being said, what can be done by individuals, generally speaking, to boost their immunity in terms of what they eat and how they spend their daily lives?
Well, before we go into that issue, I would like to remind that there are two kinds of immunity in our body. The first one is an innate immunity. You have it even though you are not exposed to that pathogen. And the second one is the specific immunity. Once you have infection, and then you get that kind of a specific immunity against that specific pathogen. And specific immunity can be also classified as B-cell immunity producing antibodies. And the other one is T-cell immunity. So asymptomatic COVID-19 patients usually have a very stronger innate immunity, like NK cells and other macrophages working against. So that's something good. You might have less chance to get other kind of viral infections also. But those patients with no symptom might have a less level of antibody and less T-cell activities against COVID-19. And research in Nature tells that can decline more rapidly compared to symptomatic patients. So it's very unfortunate that we cannot evaluate that T-cell functions because it's almost impossible at hospitals. It can be done only at laboratory study level. Same principle, I mean, we have to booster immunity by vaccination. You gain a specific immunity against pathogen, but innate immunity is something, I mean, general. I would say you better stop smoking, and you have balanced nutrition and regular exercise and good sleep, hydration. That will help booster innate immunity. And for specific immunity, we have vaccination. So if you belong to a risk group, if you have underlying condition, if you miss any vaccination, you better have it.
Right. Professor, you're on the subject of a strong immune response against COVID-19. Now, despite warnings by the WHO, the African continent remains to have been least affected by COVID-19 because the WHO had claimed that the continent itself might face devastation in light of a massive spread there. How do you explain this reality?
Well, this is kind of scientific curiosity for us because unfortunately our friends from Africa and who are staying in Africa, they're less vaccinated than other continents. But reality is a little different because they're sacrificing by the COVID-19 virus, not much than others, kind of curiosities. But anyway, so the virus usually came from Africa, like Ebola, and other named is very famous to us, very familiar with us. Why did it happen? Because Africa continent itself is bigger than other continents. And also there are natural environment, unknown virus there are, but not yet contact with the human beings. Anyway, we guess it's COVID-19 virus from China maybe, but we're not sure yet because virus came from anywhere, everywhere. But this time we are having the one report definitely in the Bill and Melinda Foundation, they comment again, and SEFI and IBI. Our friends is like global citizen. African people do not have much vaccinated. But anyway, they are least affected. But this one is not matching it. Anyway, they need more vaccination. So these days, Korean government should think about some vaccination we have enough, but the date is coming to expire. So we have to talk about not only Korea, other countries where because we be delayed and they're agitating more for the second booster or something. Let's focus about these, the less of the vaccinations can be left. We are start to talk about the donating to the African countries. Even their condition looks better, but problem is the statistics in the nation in some countries in Africa is not reliable data. So that's why it looks good, but the real life can be different. Actually, this Saturday, coming Saturday, I will go to Rwanda and I can tell you later.
Right, you'll come back from Rwanda to update us on the situation
Absolutely.
in Africa then.
Yeah.
Right, now, Professor, you mentioned the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Professor Kim, and Bill Gates himself believes that the world will see another pandemic in the near future. Given our experience with COVID-19 then, what preparations do you advise for the medical arena here?
Well, we had a huge buildup of ICU capacities during this Omicron outbreak. That is somehow, I was very welcoming that step because according to the population size, we have very less ICU capacity compared to Germany or United States and most of the European countries. So I wish that we can maintain some degree of those ICU beds as a reservation. And the current COVID-19 strategy actually came out of the MERS outbreak in 2015. And we learned from that, and now we learn from COVID-19 also. So the next strategy is going to be based on this Omicron outbreak also. We have to follow the rules from WHO, but they play the key role. But sometimes it's not that fast enough. And as we are located near to China, we might have to monitor more closely and act more fast, and should have a clear science-based strategy. And I think Taiwan was very good at the beginning of this pandemic. They started to move at the middle of December 2019. And that's something we should learn from them also. If a new strain of beta coronavirus breaks out, I think the quarantine strategy might be similar with the ones we had this pandemic. But still, we need more epidemiologists to deal with that. And one weak point of our country is the child age group, pediatric age group. The manpower and all the facilities are not enough. This COVID-19 usually attacks an elderly group, but nobody knows in the future any pathogen mostly attacking young age group or children is going to be very devastating. So we have to be vigilant for any kind of new infection in the future.
Right, we do. And staying with the same scenario, Professor Yu, what efforts need to be made on the government level to ensure a better response to another pandemic in the near future?
Well, so I believe we live in the peace. Why? Because there are invisible, strong military power. There are no strong military powers, there are no peace. Which means we already have experience since 2015 with the MERS coronavirus crisis. After that, many experts recommended we need special facilities and for invest and the training for certain the medical professional for the infectious disease. Yes, some politicians and government, they promised, but still in castle in the sense. Not yet. So, but now we have a big scar in our hearts, so we never forget. But you know what? Human being always easy to forget. But this time, we have to preparing for like a special military troop, like a UDT and Green Berets, because they are staying as with us like not temporarily, because this time many medical professionals, especially nurses, they sacrifice themselves so much. I really appreciate Korean nurses. Yes, they did it, but their condition is more temporarily contracted. So we need kind of stable contract and the more special doctors who are training for infectologists in peacetime. So we need a special infectologist facility, at least 2 or 4. Either one should be in Seoul, but other for the main city who should take care in the other area as well. So many times politicians and health authority, they promises. So we heard them many times since 2015. But please, so we are waiting for the elections, 1st of June. So we're waiting for your another promises. But I hopefully we have to realize about this, should we prepare for another pandemic? Another pandemic will come, definitely.
Right, so more action right now then.
Yeah.
Professor Kim, regarding Korea's exit strategy from COVID-19, there is talk about the possible lifting of quarantine requirement for COVID-19 patients. What are your thoughts on this?
You know, as I work in an emergency room, already we have many confusions. And this morning I just saw a patient, and the patient started to get fever after the patient attended the kindergarten. And when we were taking the history, I realized that the patient's mother got COVID-19 2 days ago. And I don't know why she sent her child to the kindergarten, knowing that she is already exposed and diagnosed. Well, even though the child is not febrile, you should keep a time of incubation period to prevent going any places or exposing himself to other children. So lifting of quarantine measures is necessary if it's in a clear decline, but some rules we have to keep. So I think it's time to re-emphasize how it spreads, what is the incubation time, and why we need those kind of quarantine strategies before. And the kindergarten teacher was with the patient, and she never knew that the kid's mother had a COVID-19, never knew the kid had a fever. So if it happens like that, the speed of decline is going to be, less, and we might face another surge. So I think it's time to re-empathize and re-educate and deal with all these confusions right now.
Right, which is why the government has been calling for informed decisions by members of the public. And staying with that, Professor Yu, what are some precautions that the public can take to ensure safety as we chart a course out of this pandemic?
Well, last 2 years, I have welcoming because the people have vaccinated against COVID-19. But my concern is people are tend to be more negative about any kind of vaccination. So already in some Southeast Asia, I don't want to mention the name of countries, already start to the kind of endemic of the measles. Because last 2 years, the younger people, like around 4 to 6 years old, they are so afraid to went to the pediatric clinic to have the MMR, measles, rubella vaccination. It's kind of mandatory, but because of shortage of the MMR vaccination, and parents are worried about the visit to clinic because they don't want to expose their children with the COVID-19. But now, relaxing, they start to be back to the new normal. The problem is well-known, but we didn't vaccinate it like a measles can occur. So, which means the back attacks from the known disease can be also seasonal influenza. I heard that many around the early 60 and later 60 young, healthy guys, they say, I don't want to have a seasonal vaccination, especially influenza, for this time, because I heard that the vaccine kills me. I was scared about it. But you know what? So human beings, thank you for the antibiotics and clean water. And WHO mentioned vaccination help to the human races live longer and healthily. So don't forget about it. Probably we need no second booster. I don't want to mention second booster about COVID-19. We need vaccines named 2022 with a seasonal influenza for 2022. But that time, please, your posture and attitude were not the negative. Probably some of yours who are watching our TVs, probably you need it. Some of your young people, probably you don't need it. But don't criticize it, don't blaming, don't say low about the vaccine itself, because new normal start with the vaccination, definitely.
Right. And regarding safety, Professor Kim, quite a number of people have been using hand sanitizers to keep them safe amid this pandemic. And having said that, what are your thoughts with the use of hand sanitizers or washing your hands? What would you propose?
Well, both are necessary, but if you compare how clean is it making, hand washing is much more better than sanitizer. So in this situation, you can wash your hands, you better wash your hands compared to hand sanitizer. Hand sanitizer is useful when you have no time, no water, or you are walking and you just have to go through sterilization very briefly. You can use it, but in our hospital, if we have those washing facilities, we better wash, and that's more effective.
Right, so soap and water then?
Yeah.
I see. All right. Professor Kim, as always, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Professor Yu, thank you for being with us, and have a safe trip to Rwanda.
Yeah, see you.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Afghanistan, a series of blasts at a high school near Kabul has left several dead. Reports say at least 6 people have been killed and 17 others injured following multiple explosions at 2 locations, a high school and an educational center in western Kabul on Tuesday. According to authorities, 3 of the blasts occurred in quick succession at the high school, with the death toll feared to rise. Meanwhile, details of the attack on the second facility are still unclear. The explosions occurred in an area home to a large Shia Hazara community, a minority group frequently targeted by extremists. No responsibility for the attack has been claimed, though the community has long been targeted by ISIS. This follows an attack in May 2021, where a bombing at a girls' school in the area killed at least 85 people, mostly teenage girls. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson issued a 2-minute apology to the UK Parliament on Tuesday, following a fine from authorities for breaking COVID rules. This comes after Johnson and Finance Minister Rishi Sunak were fined by the police last week for a gathering on his birthday in June 2020. The Prime Minister said he has paid the fine, but claimed he didn't know he was in breach of COVID lockdown rules at the time. He also denied deliberately misleading Parliament over the issue. Johnson then urged MPs to instead focus on urgent matters in Ukraine. On Thursday, lawmakers are set to hold a vote on whether Johnson should be investigated over allegations he deliberately misled Parliament, as he had initially claimed that he had followed COVID protocols. The UN warned Tuesday that millions of people living in the Horn of Africa face starvation this year, as delayed rains have worsened an ongoing drought in Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia. Despite the region's rainy season starting almost a month ago, the weather has remained dry, destroying crops and livestock and forcing vast numbers of people to leave their homes to look for food and water. According to the UN's World Food Programme, this could result in the number of hungry people increasing from current estimates of 14 million to 20 million in 2022. The WFP added that the conflict in Ukraine has contributed to the crisis, citing soaring fuel and food prices and supply chain disruptions, and called for $473 million in funding over the next 6 months to prevent a catastrophe. Experts have blamed climate change for increasing extreme weather events. Netflix reported Tuesday that the company had lost subscribers for the first time in over a decade and predicted even further losses for the second quarter of this year. The global streaming giant lost 200,000 subscribers between January and March of 2022, despite its forecast of adding 2.5 million more subscribers. Meanwhile, the company's stock price dropped 23%, erasing $30 billion from its market value. This follows a decision in early March to suspend services in Russia after the invasion of Ukraine, leading to a loss of 700,000 members, with analysts predicting that number could reach 1 million. Netflix plans to spend billions of dollars on more original content alongside mobile games in a move to bring in new subscribers amid increased competition. Other video streaming-related companies also saw their stock price drop as Roku, Walt Disney and Warner Bros. Discovery fell 6%, 3% and 2% respectively. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Wednesday afternoon. We've already reached the 6th solar terms, what we call kogu or grain rain. But instead of much needed rain, we have a dry weather advisory. Farmers often burn their fields during kogu and the tradition still continues. Currently, a powerful wind of up to 55 km/h is blowing in the east, so please do not start a fire in that region. And we're similar patterns to yesterday: high pressure, bright skies, wide gaps, and dusty air. Some inland regions will even see a wide gap of 25 degrees between highs and lows, so you do need to bundle up on your way back home in the evening. The Seoul metropolitan area will see dusty air all day long, but elsewhere will remain normal. I think you'd better stay at home today if you have respiratory symptoms. And we're expecting slight and patchy rain activity for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Other than that, it's going to be dry and sunny. Now it's time to look at the worldwide weather conditions.
And on that note, we say goodbye. Do stay tuned to Arirang News for more of the day's headlines. Thank you for now.